Repression has been increasing in recent times very much. So we are going to start with Ward Churchill, who is a quite prolific author and an expert on this theme. And he will introduce us to Cointelpro. Take it away, Ward.
Thank you. Well, Cointelpro, there's volumes worth of material on that would need to be summarized. This is going to be a very short sketch, actually. But Cointelpro is a FBI cryptonym. Ordinarily, you would call it an acronym, but it was a secret acronym. Stands for Counterintelligence Program, which is not accurate, not quite descriptive at a couple of levels. One, it wasn't just any counterintelligence program. It was a counterintelligence program, if you want to call it counterintelligence at all, directed at American citizens with political views considered objectionable by those in charge, by the status quo. More specifically, Federal Bureau of Investigation in its incarnation is the personal fiefdom of John Edgar Hoover, who was essentially director for life from 1924 on. He died in 1972. He had been director for the entire intervening period and would have continued as director, as nearly as I can tell, had he lived longer. He had also a career in what was the Bureau of Investigation at the time, predating 1924, dates back into 1917, 1918 as a special anti-radical assistant to the Attorney General of the United States. The Bureau and subsequent Federal Bureau of Investigation, as it was called, was always a part of the Justice Department, but functioned under Hoover's administration as essentially a free agent. Was responsible, accountable, ultimately to no one, set its own rules. Cointelpro began in 1956, targeting the Communist Party USA. Its objective, in the terms that they used, was to neutralize it. Neutralization doesn't have anything to do with law enforcement. It's a vernacular that was created to define the objective, which was to put the target out of action, whether that target be a political entity or a movement or individuals, by whatever means was available. So there was an entire continuum of extra legal. That's the reason for the secrecy. It was not legal at the time. It was flatly illegal insofar as it totally disregarded and violated, deliberately and systematically violated the defined constitutional and statutory rights of the citizens and citizens' organizations that were targeted. And it went on a continuum everywhere from disinformation, which operated on the basis of a nationwide stable of friendly or cooperating, collaborating, if you will, journalists. And the journalists were both print and increasingly electronic media throughout the period of the program, which in a formal sense lasted from 56, its incept date, to 1971, when its existence was discovered inadvertently from the FBI's point of view. In 71, after the existence of the program came out, Hoover ordered the discontinuation of the cryptonym, but not necessarily of the operations that were conducted under its auspices. So this continuum continued, arguably right up to the present day. Disinformation that was put out through the mass media was coupled to disinformation, rumor mongering, and so forth through a series of programs utilizing assets, as they called them, in the community. They had, at one point during the lifespan of Cointelpro, thousands of what they called ghetto informants, most of whom were not necessarily informing because they didn't really have a lot to report, although they did report. Often gratuitous information, and it had to be weeded out by the FBI. There was a lot of clutter involved in this, but they also propagated rumors that were passed along by agents, their handlers, to these so-called ghetto informants. Then you had counterparts in organizations that were ultimately targeted, including the anti-war movement, the so-called New Left, the Student Left, incipient elements of the generation of women's liberationists, as they were then called, that began in the mid to late 1960s. Ultimately, the American Indian movement, the Chicano movement, and so forth, Puerto Rican independence movement, Socialist Workers' Party. See, I'm ticking off all these organizations that were taken as formal targets. Less formally, in terms of announcing the targeting, was the civil rights movement, particularly the Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Organization, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, ultimately renamed the Student National Coordinating Committee. But each of these were taken as a discrete target. King personally was targeted, but not under the formal rubric of Cointelpro. All of the tactics used were counterintelligence, beginning with this disinformation campaign. From there, you had infiltration, which allowed for a couple of things to happen. Once you could have inside information from the organizations that were targeted, or in the inner circle of the individuals targeted wherever possible. The intelligence aspect of this was coupled to various disruptive tricks, because the other aspect of infiltration was to bring in agents provocateurs, people intended to disrupt. And they would disrupt by fomenting arguments. They would disrupt by rumor mongering about who was having an affair with whose wife, even when no such affair occurred. There's a number of instances of that, suggesting somebody was skimming from the fundraising for personal gain, that somebody was actually, and this was the worst one, there were a number of things, anything to discredit individuals who are bona fide activists and to disrupt the functioning of the organization. But quite often you would have infiltrators, agent provocateurs, engaged in what was known as snitch jacketing or bad jacketing, which is my preferred term. It's a technique where an infiltrator, an operative of a police or intelligence agency, will spread the rumor, sometimes plant evidence to the effect that a bona fide activist, a genuine activist, was a police operative, a police informant. So then you have suspicion is fomented, and one of the objectives that's articulated in the rubric of Cointelpro in their internal documents was to ratchet up the level of paranoia among the targeted groups and targeted individuals within them. It operated not only within groups, but since both organizations would be infiltrated, they fostered antagonisms between the organizations, ideological disputes. And we have enough of those in the dissident sectors of American society. Ideological disputes take place of genuine activism quite often, but these guys would whip it up. And particularly, as it turns out, they would attempt to foment antagonism between groups when one or both were considered genuinely to be violence prone. The clearest example of this, it's almost comical in a way, but a sick sort of humor, was an operation Cointelpro directed against the Communist Party called Hoodwink. Hoodwink was to convince the mafia in New York along the piers, where they were smuggling in heroin and all sorts of goods, very lucrative practice for the mob, convince them that the New York longshoremen were being organized by the Communist Party to impair their smuggling operations, in hopes that the mob would respond in a very effective way, which is to say, neutralizing the targets by killing them or beating them half to death, or otherwise intimidating them so that they would leave town. You had a counterpart to that in Chicago, where they targeted Dick Gregory, tried to whip the remnants of the Capone organization, which was still fairly potent in the 1960s, into targeting Gregory for neutralization in an entirely predictable manner. But they did that between organizations too, cause them to expend their time, not necessarily killing each other, but ultimately that would come into play. Late 60s in particular, they were doing this all the time, but caused them to squander their time, energy, and resources in internecine faction fighting within themselves and among themselves, just basically to disable the whole operation. From there, you would go to, they had what they call the Key Agitators Index. They had a Black nationalist photo album by the late 1960s also, that was disseminated so that FBI Cointelpro sections in each of the major offices and a number of the resident agencies as well had pictures of people who were to be targeted on site for one of a number of things. But one of those was pretext arrests, people who were identified as members of one of the targeted organizations, particularly, as it turned out, with the Black Panther Party and Revolutionary Action Movement, which is another targeted organization. They were arrested on any pretext. And it's the famous broken tail light thing too. The pretexts often were things that hadn't even happened. And you can escalate that pretext arrest. Often they wouldn't even take them to trial. They'd just take them to jail for a few days. 72 hours usually being the limit, but not necessarily. Sometimes they were able to hold them longer, just to take them out of action, disrupt activity. And if they did, prosecute on anything from a traffic stop to disorderly conduct to armed robbery to murder. There were murder cases brought with no particular prospect of obtaining a prosecution, which would be a law enforcement function. They just want to tie them up in court. Meanwhile, they're tying the individuals that are targeted in this fashion, as well as the organizations, as you get to people who are more and more key to its function, target them for this arrest and prosecution. They've got to raise bail. They've got to raise money for defense funds. Okay. To mount a legal defense in hopes of securing a not guilty verdict. And often that worked because the cases were often very weak, but it got more and more serious. It got to the point where they were fabricating evidence. They were suppressing evidence. They did that as a matter of course, but we're talking wholesale, suborning false witness, using infiltrators who denied they were infiltrators, and so on, so on, so on. A couple cases of that are on record, and there's closure because there's essentially a documented outcome where Dhoruba bin Wahad, who was actually tried 3 times for the attempted murder of 2 cops. He was a member of the New York Black Panther chapter, one of the Panther 21, who was bailed out and then went underground rather than show up for the verdict, which turned out to be not guilty straight down the line, a very sensational outcome. But Deruba was underground, and one of the prosecutors of that case was, his home was attacked. They put, it was attacked by the Weather Underground, I think. And there was an ambush set for 2 cops. It was never really established that Deruba had anything to do with that, but they fabricated a case. He spent 19 years in prison before it came out that both the boss of the Red Squad in New York and the FBI had collaborated to mount a case against him, false imprisonment. So you've got this extra legal use of the judicial system. This moves on up the continuum to the point, as with, Geronimo Pratt was another case. He did 27 years. We don't really have time to go into all these cases, but they're going to ring familiar in the context of people represented by Jericho, the prisoners that are being talked about now. It connects right up to them. Top scale, when all else fails, is simply assassinate them or arrange for the assassination, either through use of collaborating police department. I don't have a record or nothing on record that I can cite where FBI personnel themselves conducted the assassination, but in Chicago, it arranged for a special squad, state's attorney's police, to conduct a assassination of Fred Hampton, and along with him, Peoria Defense Captain Mark Clark on the 4th of December, 1969. And ultimately that case was settled. It should have been something a little beyond settlement of the case. Or using personnel infiltrators, as it turns out, in a competing a rival organization, whatever. As was the case with Bunchy Carter and John Huggins from the LA Panther chapter, even before Clark, or even before Hampton Clark, which so-called US organization, competing for who's going to lead the Black Student Union and UCLA campus. So you had 2 Panthers killed there. Ultimately, according to the FBI, who put out propaganda to this effect, a scorecard that said us 6, Panthers 0. So they were taking credit for 6 dead Panthers in this internecine warfare. They've been whipped out by the FBI, and there's a whole series of cartoons that were put out defaming Ron Karinga, who is the head of the US organization on the one hand. Those supposedly put out by Panthers, although they weren't. They were put out by the FBI, and vice versa. Cartoons that defamed and degraded Panther leadership that were supposedly put out by the US organization, same deal. US didn't do it. The FBI did, but they copied the styles of the visual propaganda that was put out by both organizations. As I say, there was a disclosure of the existence of this program. First, I've just skimmed the highlights of a few things. This was happening continuously on a nationwide scale. The disclosure of that by virtue of a Citizens Review Commission, as they called themselves, Citizens Review Commission to investigate the FBI, which broke into an FBI office, resident agency office in Media, Pennsylvania in 1971, and conducted what the FBI calls a black bag job, which is essentially a burglary, and they were looking for information. So what they took was files, and in the files that they took were some documents captioned Cointelpro, and this began the question of what is it? What is this Cointelpro thing? Church committee ultimately church committee was Senate Select Committee that was formed after disclosures of CIA operations that were illegal, including domestic operations. And by charter, they're prohibited from domestic operations. But enough had come out by then about the FBI, that the FBI was included, as well as the NSA and military intelligence. Cointelpro was covered, not as thoroughly as the CIA, and it was an operation of containment to a certain extent. They defined the entirety of Cointelpro as having been illegal, but they were very careful to stop short of concluding that there had been framed cases like Geronimo Pratt and a number of others at the time, or assassinations. They pointed to the FBI trying to orchestrate assassinations or engaging in operations where the likely outcome would be the death of someone, but they stopped short of saying the FBI was responsible for these assassinations. They took due note of the 1971 termination of Cointelpro as the FBI proclaimed it. It was actually only the termination of the cryptonym, as I said. And the church committee itself noted that that in the course of its investigation, it had come upon at least 6 ongoing FBI operations that had the hallmarks of Cointelpro. Now, 2 of those were the operation against the American Indian movement in the mid-1970s on Pine Ridge nationally, but focused on Pine Ridge, and against the Vietnam veterans against the war with the Gainesville 8 trial and such as that. The remaining 4, well, I'd come up with more candidates than that, but you know, they didn't say it was an exhaustive list, and they didn't name the organizations that the operations were being conducted against. But Cointelpro did not end in 1971. The nomenclature changed. Instead of talking about radicals and extremists, they started talking about terrorists. All right. So by definition, if you were a target, you were a terrorist. And there was counterterrorism operations that continued right through the 80s, demonstrably with the C-SPACE investigation and such. And we could trace it right up to the present time. So you got people still being targeted and neutralized by the FBI within the rubric of Cointelpro to this day. Only thing is, what was illegal at the time has been systematically legitimated, that is by statute or by executive order, particularly the 1996 Counterterrorism Act Bill Clinton signed, and of course the cleanup acts, the 2 Patriot Acts, and after the beginning of the new century. So Cointelpro lives, but Cointelpro lives actually in a more refined, sophisticated form with increased technological capacity to engage in activities and so on. That's the context. It was illegal from the moment that it started. It had been illegal for decades before that. It remains illegal in any sensible understanding of the law, and yet you've got all these caveats now that legitimate these activities. Just this morning in the New York Times, they were talking about the FBI having gone beyond the parameters of FISA to engage in mass surveillance, wiretapping, in essence, of American citizens repeatedly. And they're going to have better training, and they've revised the rules and regulations again. So now everybody should feel better. Yeah. But as I say, it goes on. If it looks like Cointelpro, if it feels like Cointelpro, if it smells like Cointelpro, it is Cointelpro.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ward. Really appreciate that overview. I know we could talk about this, as you said, literally for years. You know, we could talk about Cointelpro for years. But I would encourage people, if you haven't already read some of Ward's books, check them out, because it's really, really thorough, you know, review of all this horrible illegal stuff that the U.S. government is constantly doing against anybody who disagrees with their opinion. So thank you so much. And next up, we have Sister Shafia Mbalia. She works with the Black Workers for Social Justice, and she is part of a coalition of people who are sponsoring a bill called HR 2998, which would require disclosure of all of these Cointelpro documents that nobody has been allowed to see for all these years, and showing their continuing cover-up of past and current events. Take it away, Sister Mbalia.
Thank you
Hold
for
on a
having
sec,
us
we're not
here.
hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting us. Want to thank Brother Ward for that overview, such a comprehensive overview, much detail. I think it's really important, his last point. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, squeaks like a duck, the water rolls off it like a duck, it's a duck. And we would not put it, you know, COINTELPRO is maybe the alphabet, but the key word is repression. And the key word is repression against all movements and all individuals who speak out against the state as it is functioning, against state policy, who disagree. You know, it came out last year, for example, that even someone as unrelated to the movement or steps away from the movement, such as Aretha Franklin, was also targeted for surveillance because she made a donation to SCLC, so Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So we are indeed happy that that Ward gave that overview and threw the ball in our court, just in terms of a wider view of what is going on in the country. It's really important for folks to make that connection, not only between all of the different movements that have existed in the United States that he's named, Black Liberation Movement, the Puerto Rican Independence Movement, the Indigenous Peoples Movement, but also when local activists are involved in local movements to change local policies, to do things that disrupt the flow of money. And I'm thinking specifically about young workers who are doing work around gangs. You know, the Department of Justice has something called the Guns and Gangs Initiative, and it takes place around the country under different names. And we heard of it first in Greenville, North Carolina, under one name, and then we didn't know that it was a national program until we heard of a similar program happening in Savannah, Georgia, where young brothers who are young Black and brown men who get involved or may not be involved in street organization and are targeted, accused of having guns or accused of having drugs. And they are pulled in and told that, you know, they have to cooperate with local authorities, and that the local authorities are going to let them slide with small misdemeanors, like, as was mentioned, a broken tail light, or being out in curfew, or being in the wrong neighborhood. While this is going on, the local police department is trying to build relations with local ministers, local social workers, local grandmoms who are active in the neighborhood associations, collecting information from neighborhood associations about who lives where, who's active and what, and trying to build a local surveillance network. these young brothers are then told, so like, if you don't cooperate with us, then the next time you even cross the chalk line, you make such a small move, then we're going to snatch you up and we're going to throw the book at you and charge you with every kind of crime that we can put on you. Meanwhile, those folks who are working to give gangs or street organizations purpose, they are targeted as well. And so the local police departments have been known to go to pastors and tell pastors that these local folks who are working with the young people are actually recruiting for the gang. And then they'll go to the gangs and they'll tell them that, you know, Sister so-and-so, she's a police snitch. And so it creates, you know, the same kind of division and attacks in the local community about work that is going on to give purpose to young people and potentially tie them to the larger movements, the larger liberation movements that the state has repressed in the past and are trying to rebuild now. So we want to make it really clear that it's almost like a matrix of attention that is put in particular to Black, Brown, and Indigenous young people, Black, Brown, Indigenous movement organizations, but it also includes women and other organizations. The Exposed Cointelpro and Beyond coalition is a coalition of folks who are working to have a bill in Congress that publicly exposes all of the documents of the former Cointelpro program. It's no longer called 2998. It was originally introduced by Bobby Rush, former Panther and former congressman out of Illinois, Bobby Rush. He has since retired, and so the bill died, but we are working with and happy and grateful to be working with Cori Bush's office. And she has agreed to take the bill up and are investigating tightening up the wording. We want to publicly expose all the millions of pages of documentation that the FBI has recorded against all the folks folks who are doing time now, who are victims of Cointelpro, like Imam Jamil El-Amin, where there's more than 57,000 pages of the documented of the harassment, surveillance, intimidation, attacks against him. Thousands of pages of Al-Mutumu, Shakur, thousands of pages of other activists and organizations around the country. But we're also concerned and want to point out to folks that, you know, this, again, the duck is walking. And the latest tool in the Department of Justice and all the other state surveillance alphabet soup is something that they're using that stands for 1934, that was just used against the African People's Socialist Party, called the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And this is particularly important because there are folks around the world, there are movements who are waiting for us in this country to get our act together to rebuild them, connect with them. And anyone who is doing international solidarity work to connect our movements again to the liberation movement and progressive organizations around the world are being targeted. And this is always been, internationalism has always been a part of our various movements under different names. There are folks who call themselves Pan-Africanists now, and of course have been in the history going back all the way back to W.B. Du Bois, who himself was targeted, and Paul Robeson was targeted, and the founders or the initiators of the 1954, we charged genocide petition to the United Nations. His name is escaping me at the moment. It'll come back to me. But everyone who has done international work APSP, the attack against them is what's the latest move. And so they're being charged simply for publishing information that goes against United States policy and challenges its view about what is happening with the war in Ukraine with Russia. This act is extremely dangerous. We have folks who, for example, have been collecting documentation of U.S. policies against political prisoners and submitting that information to the United Nations. As we speak, under the rubric of the International Decade for People of African Descent, there are folks who've been doing work around international solidarity with Cuba to end, the United States immoral, internationally illegal blockade that is slowly strangling the people of that country. There are folks who's doing international solidarity with the people of Haiti. We can name on and on that our efforts to rebuild our ties and rebuild our movement, is being influenced by the United States government. And so it's not just Cointelpro that we are concerned about. We are concerned about the efforts of the United States to suppress any effort to build for quality, change quality for our lives, and challenge U.S. policy in the process of doing so. And so we want to thank everyone for the time that's being put forward. This opened up for us to speak today. We think that it's extremely important that the forces of Jericho and the forces of Freedom Mandela and the forces we're building in the labor movement and the Black Liberation Movement, Indigenous peoples movements, that all the various solidarity movements that we are building united front against this fascist motion that is taking hold and building momentum in the United States. And we think that working together with this bill against Cointelpro is one step. And we want to also declare our solidarity with APSP, in standing against this attack against them. And we think that this is a time for really building united front, working together. This is not a time to go into our silos, but to connect our silos and build a field of resistance together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is so important. We do have to work together to defeat these fascists. Thank you so much, sister. Okay, we have actually in the room King Downing. King Downing is an activist attorney. He's been doing work with all of us for a long time. And unbeknownst to me, he had also been doing a lot of work around Cointelpro. So he was going to talk about two separate things that are related, which is Cointelpro against hip hop and Cointelpro against Black Lives Matter, which are very interesting. And he's going to be short now because he's going to come back later as an attorney and tell us what we can do to help minimize the effect of all these horrible repressive measures. Also wanted to give a shout out to Susan Rosenberg, one of our former political prisoners, and Ojiri Nutalo, another one of our former political prisoners who are in the house today. I think you need to use the mic.
Is there all power to the people. All power to the people. So people.
All power to the people.
For the people out there. So thank you for making time. I was squeezed in here, so I am going to be brief. And thanks always to the People's Forum for us to have a safe political space, or at least relatively safe when the police aren't raiding the place, to have a place where we can do this and have it be in Midtown, right in the belly of the beast. So I also want to thank you all for being here, especially the people who came out in person, in the rain on top of everything else. So I
wanted to add a few pieces to this because of the fact that what we've seen in the past is still going on, and there's no need to even doubt that. It's been very clear that COINTELPRO has continued in a bunch of ways. And so I just want to make 3 quick points. And the first is, as I just said, that it still goes on today. I want to give 2 examples of it. And then in the last part, I'm going to do something that Kwame Ture said. He said it 40 years ago, it's still true today. He said, we are, and you can complete this if you know it, we are past the time for description. The time is now for, and it rhymes with description, prescription. So if we were to come here and just talk about COINTELPRO and not talk about what to do about it, then for me, that would be a waste of time. No, nothing personal against anybody who speaks here. But that's my goal, is to figure out what tools can we use to fight back against it, but also to protect ourselves and our organizations. So one of the first examples that I wanted to deal with was what I call Repression, or COINTELPRO 2.0. It was an attack on hip hop, and there were very clear reasons for it. But before I get into those, there was a historical connection in the past. And Ward, thanks to the other speakers who are going to come up, including Lisa. So Ward talked about Fred Hampton. He didn't talk about the connection between Fred Hampton, the street organizations, and COINTELPRO. So the agencies already had a history of doing those kind of attacks, and the same things that they did between the East and the West Coast chapters of the party, and what they did with the US organization. By the way, it was 2 Steiger brothers who were informants within the US organization that are alleged to have killed the 2 of them. And it has created dissension between the 2 organizations to this day, beyond whether you're a cultural nationalist or you're a Pan-Africanist. It goes deeper than that, because one organization has been killed, accused of killing the members of another one. So that was one example of the way they created that divisiveness, and also with Fred and the Vice Lords that did the same thing at that time. And so it wouldn't be any surprise to find out that they were doing this in the modern era. And that's what I call Repression. And it was, the reason I wanted the lights on is because I was writing all this with a very thin pencil. But it was Wes Swearingen who is the one that said that it was the informants within the US organization, former FBI agent, that said that it was informants there that had killed Bunchy and John. So this time around, counterintelligence decided to take it to a new level and not wait until street organizations got politicized, because by then it was too late. Bunchy was very potent as an organizer. So in this generation, they decided to take a preemptive strike and attack hip hop before hip hop gained consciousness, except for one artist who had, and that's Tupac. He was the exception. But they went after them with a vengeance. And we can, yeah, let's take a look at so this is a trailer. What's next is a trailer for a documentary that was done about Derek Parker, who was part of the NYPD and set up the Rap Intelligence Unit. And he was educated by another group that Ward mentioned, which was BOSS, which was the intelligence branch of NYPD.
I Cointelpro, practice their account. Practice how you know, it's that way on the organization, but if they got that, that's how I got pulled over for having. Yeah, like that without, you know, what's now. The games all around is that they have. Puppies one. Older guys, the little kid, the mafia guys. In the place. It's not where it is. They're not doing this to rock them. They're not doing this to a lot of entertainment that they could be sitting on the day. This is waste. It's going out. But that's sort of consistent in any area where that's found. They got mafia focus. If mafia focus, the person who go purpose is the fire. Okay, these persons are said to be the new people and may have. Literally, this leaders. It's like, man, it's like you gotta just adapt to it. That's it. I adapt to it. I don't care less about the concept.
Okay, so that's how we first found out about this. It was during a hip hop weekend. There were complaints about what was going on down there. So at that time I was with the ACLU, and we actually got a hold of the Rap Intelligence Unit binder. You all can take a look in here. The artists they're all in here. They're all their pedigree, arrest information, property owned. And this is only one of 2 volumes. I only brought the smaller one because it's so heavy. And it turned out that this was being shared around the country and police departments were being trained. It's just that the Miami Police Department didn't realize it was supposed to be a secret. And so we were able to get a hold of the copy of it. But it's no joke. It's no joke, because this was the capstone of what had been going on around political consciousness in hip hop since the early 80s. For example, Wu-Tang Clan was attacked and the feds tried to stop their shows because Papa Wu was an associate of Sonny Carson, and Wu-Tang was doing a lot of work around Pan-African and other kinds of Black issues. And that's something that was never really told about what they were up to. And they tried to stop them from performing with Rage Against the Machine, another group which had been outspoken and even held a concert somehow at the basketball arena over in New Jersey. So they went after group during this time, trying to stop them from achieving any kind of consciousness. And then of course, it all culminated with Tupac, who was already politicized, part of the New African People's Organization. He became one of their national leaders, top seller of their newspaper. And there is incident after incident of him being attacked by unknown people, where the allegations are that the way it was done resembled police activity. And because of the time, I'm not going to go into it. But at the same time, he was with Death Row Records. Suge Knight was made of Teflon. With all of the charges he had, he never got arrested. David Kenner and some of the other people there had intelligence connections, and Death Row was filled with cops, undercover. And that's one of the reasons why he pushed back. And 9 days after he fired David Kenner as his manager, who had his own intelligence connections, he was killed in Las Vegas. And one of the undercover cops, Kevin Hasty, had become his bodyguard. And he claims he had a moment of sympathy and told Pac not to go to Las Vegas because he knew what was going on. This is what he says after the fact. I don't believe him, happen to not believe him. But it does show that there was awareness by the police that there was a plot. He was surrounded by surveillance. There was a police officer in the second car, an undercover officer. And so there's all kinds of evidence to show that that's what was going on. And the last part I'll say about this is that there was a parallel between the East and West Coast rivalry of the party and the made up East and West Coast hip hop rivalry. which people like Wendy Williams, she's no journalist, but she was repeating that there are bodies all over, up and down the coast on each side. And in the usual way that organized crime got with the federal government in order to carry things out, there's reason to believe that the killing of Biggie was a diversion from the killing of Tupac, and it was also designed to set up a hip hop war. And they also undermined Pac because he was taking part in some of the gang truces, street set truces. So I'll leave it there. I'll just say a word about the other, if there's a time to do a minute about the Black identity extremists. So I was part of the Ferguson Legal Defense Committee, and we were on the ground doing legal observations of the protests. We were representing people as they were getting arrested. And I remember we were on a van going from one arrest site to another, and somebody had sent out a text saying that the feds had designated the operation, because remember, there was no organization at that time, right? Black Lives Matter was a phrase, and it still is to me like Black Power. It's not a single organization because that organization adapted the name. And we were seeing documentation that there had been some terrorism designation around the movements there. And we didn't think anything of it other than to pay closer attention. And then learned in 2017 that the Black identity extremist designation and report had been put out by a subset of the FBI terrorism unit, saying that people in the movements were prone to violence, and there was an increasing evidence of a violent movement that was behind Black Lives Matter. Now, when you go through the report, and you can look for Black identity extremists, they give 6 examples of violence against police officers. Not one of them was connected to any organization, even remotely. And the one person who did have an affiliation with a new version of the Black Panther Party, he was pulled into buying a gun for somebody, and it had nothing to do with his organization, neither the money, his going in to do it, or the person who was receiving it. It was a completely apolitical entrapment with no organization involved. So that's all the evidence they had. And this was so bad, even the Black Police Officers Association said that this was an improper designation, but it hasn't stopped them. And so if you can go to the, is it the next slide? Okay. So these are some of the tactics in it, and what I'll do is I'll leave it here. The ones in the yellow are the ones that are mostly known about. We know about the infiltration, the psychological warfare, and the force and violence, but we don't know as much about false labeling. Words that people will say, like, we need to take the system down. Well, they'll use that and say, see, they're violent, and therefore we can designate them as a terrorist group, and that triggers all sorts of things, including the fusion centers. Grand jury harassment, that goes back to the earlier time. Prosecuting leaders and supporters, they began to move during some of the presidential conventions, rounding up and visiting people before the actions had even started as a way of intimidating. Of course, this was new, and the use of false statements that have been verified now because of the fact that people are able to use videos to pull those statements out, where in the past, it was up to the police, whatever they wanted to say politically. And I'll tell you, there are 12 states where videotaping the police is illegal. So there's still some pushback that has to go on. Even tampering with videos, cutting people parts. If I told you how many times families come to me and the video is only part of the video, it only shows what happened when the police did what they did, but doesn't show anything that happened before that. And the key word, and this is where I'll leave it at, is, well, no, one more after that. The word now is preemption. They do it internationally. They claim they can attack a country because the country was about to attack them or could attack them. And that's what they've done to the hip hop generation and to movements before they even start, taking action before anything happens. And if you could just go to, okay. So there's just some quick slides to show what's happening. And a brother here just gave me one about about how the NYPD had been infiltrating Black Lives Matter. So I don't know how many copies you have of that, but we can take a look at that. Go to the next one. So they're using phone trackers and cell site simulators to pull in the conversations between people who are protesting. Go to the next one. Oh, go up then. Maybe there should be one more. Back. Is there one more before that? Okay. All right. Well, the one that showed all the less than lethal weapons was not there, but that's another tactic. So I'll be back later to talk about what we do about all this. So thanks for the time.
Okay, King has brought a lot of paperwork, very interesting. Next up, we have somebody that I always say I'm in his groupie, which is Baba Ngoma Osayemi, who is an amazing, amazing cultural warrior, also a spiritual warrior. And he has been doing this work for a long, long time, bringing all these issues to people. Unfortunately, due to some technical, I don't know what you want to call it, technical deficiencies, he will not be able to give us his full repertoire because we did not know we were going to be in this space, and he did not bring his amplifier. But other than that, I am not worried about it. And I am very happy that Baba Ngoma has agreed to be here with us once again, as he has always been throughout all these years. Thank you, Baba Ngoma. Do I need to hold this mic up? Question.
Okay. If they come for me in the morning, they'll come before you at noon. Listen to what I'm saying, it may be coming soon. There are many pages missing from the books of history. Blood is the price of freedom, and it's no mystery why our prophets disappear. Why was our black prince shot down in his prime? What about the dream of freedom that he left behind? Will we learn the lessons Malcolm taught? Will we join the battle that he so bravely fought? Malcolm lives in the people's struggle, his spirit is alive. Malcolm lives in the people's struggle, he will never die. I didn't ask to come here, I was kidnapped. Tied tied down to the bottom of a slave ship, transported like cattle. I didn't ask to come here, feeding slaves last forever. Ask Grandmother L on the bumpers, ask Philip and L, ask Rodney King. I didn't ask to come here. Nobody asked me if I wanted to be a citizen. I didn't hijack a boat to come to these shores, lose my name, my religion, my ancestors, my land, my mind. I didn't ask to integrate nor assimilate. No more auction block for me. I didn't ask to be America. These not the ones that bombed Hiroshima, killed Vietnamese babies, spread man-made diseases, spilled blood and guts in the name of the cross, the lash, and the gun, stole the Indians' land, level the Holy Land. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave. I just want to be accepted in the human race with peace, love, justice, and equality. Freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom, freedom, freedom over me, well, yeah. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave, and I'd fight for the right to be free.
So my set is a little raggedy because I play a bunch of instruments and I'm not playing on them. So we're gonna do the best we can. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. And I fight for the right to be free. 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 Oh, yeah. That sounds a little better. Doo-doo-dip. 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 Where I come from back of the bus and colored water fountains. I come from segregated toilets and no niggas or dogs allowed. I come from segregated and unequal schools with hand-me-down books. I come from sit up in the balcony. I come from you can't buy a house in this neighborhood. I come from you can't eat at this lunch counter. I come from go around the back to get your food. I come from picket lines, bus boycotts, and fire hoses. I come from freedom rides, freedom songs, and jail cells. I come from we've been buked and we've been scorned. I come from we shall overcome. I come from black fist raised high, little Bobby Hutton, Fred Hampton, and George Jackson. I come from street fighting and rebellion, San Quentin and Attica. I come from, I turn the page. San Quentin and Attica, Black Panthers, Young Lords, and free breakfast programs. I come from runaway slaves. I come from Amiri Baraka, Simba Wachanga, and Watu Wazuri. I come from poor libations on ancestors' graves. I come from the struggle to be free, to be free, to be free. Whoa. Oh, well, sometimes, I feel well, like a motherless child. Whoa. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Oh, well, sometimes, I feel, well, like a motherless child. A long way from home. Long way from home. Some of the people's names that I'm going to call in this, in some of these poems have passed. Some of them were prisoners and now they're free, but I still put their names in the poems so that we'll always remember them, and so we'll always remember that they are still political prisoners in the United States. This poem is called Uncomfortable Conversations. Many times, Black folk go out of their way not to make white folk feel uncomfortable. But we've been uncomfortable ever since we were brought here in chains. When driving while Black, every time we hear a police siren, we live in fear. Living in a police state, but you say it can't happen here in these yet-to-be United States that you claim is post-racial. But these cops act like having brown skin is illegal, living in a reality show where there is no sequel. When we go into a department store, you follow us like thieves, but we're the ones that were stolen along with whole countries, along with our history that's outlawed and aborted, our story distorted, or saw or set Heru, replaced by blue-eyed Jesus, then led to believe that anything unchristian is a sin and that there was no history before the Nicene Council 325 AD. Around 1611, when that perverted James the King rewrote the Bible that he stole from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it's been said, the Sun Book, AKA the Book of Coming Forth by Day, extracting the 42 laws of Ma'at and leaving only 10 commandments. You would need more books. You would need to read more books to understand this, but media and gangster rap makes education unpopular these days. So intellectual curiosity has taken a backstage to video games, hand-to-eye coordination, training folk to be quick on the trigger for wars never ending. The economy is broken, so the foreign land, your sons and daughters, they're ascending to maim, kill, and murder those who pray to Allah. Meanwhile, social media overloads of distraction inundating us with commercials got us trying to keep up with the Joneses, while children in China slaving sweatshops making smartphones. Broken windows, stop and frisk policy is a part of the conspiracy. The criminalization of a generation in a country where the rate of incarceration is the largest in the, I wish I could call it, civilized world. And whole cities are employed from prison privatization as a means to control population, where the demographic is rapidly changing from white to black and brown. Meanwhile, there's still a struggle concerning abortion. Cancer treatment has become an industry because in the cure, there's no profit. The educational system is only designed for training. Critical thought is lacking. They don't want us thinking. We might just figure out fascism is rising, so we need to have these uncomfortable conversations. It's too late to change the channel. The atmosphere is polluted with radiation, and it's not safe to put your head in the sand. Now we're doing die-ins, chanting hands up, don't shoot, I can't breathe.
Woo-hoo.
Music for my soldiers, music for my soldiers, yeah. Music for my soldiers, music for my soldiers. This is music for my soldiers, from the red, the black, and green. My comrades in arms with liberation dreams. My people united to take a stand. My people fighting to free the land. This is music for my soldiers standing tall. Political prisoners and POWs behind the wall. This is music for Asata, for Maroon and Mumia, for Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin and Jalil Muntakim, for Leonard Peltier, for Sin K. McGee, Matulu Shakur, Oscar Lopez Rivera, and Robert Seth Hayes. This is music for my soldiers, music for my soldiers. This is for those fighting a system that's rotten. I sing these names so you won't be forgotten. This is for the list that's too long to call, music to make the walls of Jericho fall. This is music for my soldiers, yeah. Music for my soldiers, John Africa and the Move family. This is a song calling ancestors who fought the good fight. From the break of day to the dark of night, Black Panthers, BLA, Deacons of Defense, RNA, Herman Ferguson, Sonny Abu Badika, Carson, Malcolm X. This is for Ilombe Brath and Carlos Cook, fighting for liberation by hook or crook, for Robert Williams, for Harriet Tubman, for Fred Hampton and little Bobby Hutton. This is music for my soldiers. Those that fought and died, we call your name. We vow you did not die in vain. This is music for my soldiers. This is music for my soldiers, for the red, the black, and green. My comrades in arms with liberation dreams. My people united to take a stand. My people fighting to free the land. This is for the soldiers. All power to the people. For Nat Turner, Khalid Muhammad, for Sekou Odinga and Dekwi, for Amiri Baraka, for Matulu Shakur, for G2A Usi and Safia Bukhari, for my people in exile, Pete O'Neill and Mama C, for the Jericho movement, free all political prisoners, free the land.
Yeah. Woo!
Some of these poems, some of these poems in my book.
Yeah, these are mine.
Some of these poems in my book, I didn't come here to tap dance. No.
It's a great book,
You might
folks.
want to got about 50 years worth of poems in it. I think you'll like a lot of it.
I brought mine with me so you can sign it for me later.
Yes, indeed.
Gonna do one more?
Yeah. Sure can.
Oh,
Perfect. So I'm usually playing a whole bunch of instruments and stuff.
yes, it's pretty amazing, actually.
This is called Real Black Panthers Ain't in Wakanda. Epigraph. There are over 69 political prisoners and POWs captured in these yet to be United States. This poem is livicated to them with my apology that there are too many to mention. Real Black Panthers ain't in Wakanda. Never had vibranium. Ain't Afrofuturistic. In fact, their future is in peril, an endangered species. Living heroes and sheroes, not Marvel characters imagined by Disney, no blockbuster movie by Hollywood. America says they don't exist, but J. Edgar Hoover declared them dangerous. Counterintelligence programmed them, disappeared them behind prison walls. Warriors in the struggle never asked to be citizens. Righteous soldiers, they did not wear uniforms. Guilty only of taking a stand to free the land, framed by a system that refuses to acknowledge their sovereignty. Go and tell the children, tell them we have real heroes that lived and died for freedom. Call them by their name: Fred Hampton, Little Bobby Hutton, Safia Bukhari, Herman Ferguson, Bashir Hamid, Zaid Malik Shakur, Geronimo as in G. Jaga Pret. Just a few who died too soon, like Kuwasi Balagoon. There's no need to make shit up. Many still languish behind the walls, heroes and sheroes standing tall. Mumia Abu Jamal, Russell Maroon Schultz, Herman Wallace, Matulu Shakur, Jalil Mutakim, Robert Seth Hayes, Imam Jamil Al-Amin, Rochelle Sinkay McGee, some locked down almost half a century. Yes, my friends, there are real Black Panthers. This is only a few that need to be freed, and they damn sure ain't in Wakanda. What's the call? Free 'em all. What's the call? What's the call? Peace, y'all.
Yay, thank you so much, Ngoma. Sorry about the technical deficiencies. Oh, good, he's got some copies of the book with him. As long as we were talking about these folk, I'll just make a very brief announcement. We have a brother named Ed Poindexter, and back in the day, he was one of the Omaha 2, and they were totally framed up and convicted by Cointelpro all the way back in 1971. So Ed has been in prison for 52 years for a crime he did not commit. And just recently had his left leg amputated below the knee without any, notification to his family or any such. People found out when they went to visit him that his leg had been amputated below the knee because he's in a so-called medical center where he's not getting treatment, as we all know what, these death camps are really all about. So we have a campaign going. You can go to jerichony.org and check it out. People, please make those phone calls, send those faxes. We're trying to get some form of release for Ed, and he does have a defense committee that's working on that. I just wanted to bring that up briefly because it's happening now. And also our brother Kamal Siddiqui, another victim of Cointelpro, also in a so-called medical facility, also not receiving adequate medical care, also having been threatened with amputation of his leg in the past. So that's just a couple little things I wanted to say quickly, because we're probably running over time, but I think we have more time. So we're okay on that. Next up, we have a brother named Monty Pinger. Monty Pinger is a water protector. He was involved in the struggle against the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and also Line 3. And he's currently also working with the campaign to free Jessica Resnicek, who is not a terrorist, as you say. She was accused of that and was given a terrorism enhancement at her trial, which added a whole bunch of time to her sentence. Go ahead, Monty.
Thank you. I'm Monty. I'm with the campaign to free Jessica Resnicek, and I just want to start off with a poem by Langston Hughes that he wrote in 1938. It's called Kids Who Die. This is for the kids who die, black and white, for the kids who will die certainly. The old and rich will live on a while, as always, eating blood and gold, letting kids die. Kids will die in the swamps of Mississippi, organizing sharecroppers. Kids will die in the streets of Chicago, organizing workers. Kids will die in the orange groves of California, telling others to get together. Whites and Filipinos, Negroes and Mexicans, all kinds of kids will die, who don't believe in lies and bribes and contentment and a lousy peace. Of course, the wise and learned who pen editorials in the papers, and the gentlemen with doctor in front of their names, white and black, who will make surveys and write books, will live on weaving words to smother the kids who die, and the sleazy courts and the bribe-reaching politicians and bribe-reaching police and blood-loving generals and the money-loving preachers will all raise their hands against the kids who die, beating them with laws and clubs and bayonets and bullets to frighten the people. For the kids who die are like iron in the blood of the people, and the old and rich don't want the people to taste the iron of the kids who die, don't want the people to get wise to their own power, to believe in Angelo or Non or get together. Listen, kids who die, maybe now there will be no monument for you except in our hearts. Maybe your bodies will be lost in the swamp or a prison grave or the potter's field or the rivers where you're drowned like Liebknecht. But the day will come, you are sure yourselves that it is coming, when the marching feet of the masses will raise for you a living monument of love and joy and laughter, and black hands and white hands clasped as one, and a song that reaches the sky, the song of the life triumphant through the kids who die. So that was written in 1938, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Jessica Reznicek. Jessica is currently serving an 8-year sentence in Wasikra Federal Prison in Minnesota. Jessica was born in rural Iowa, in a small town outside of Des Moines, and one of like her childhood was kind of rough, and one of the places that she found solace in, one of the places where she could find peace as a child, was in the rivers in Iowa, especially the Raccoon River. And she told me about like going there as a kid, and she'd go there and go underwater and listen to like that calm sound of the water rushing by. And it was a place that she really felt connected to, and she could find peace and love, and kind of like a maternal bond. And so Jessica took part in a lot of movements. She was one of those people who had an intolerance for injustice. And so from like when she was a kid to now, she was always fighting for something. And so when the No Dapple movement popped up at Standing Rock, and actually before it really kind of became a big movement, there was a group of Lakota and Dakota youth who were running to DC, and Jessica joined them and kind of drove the van all the way to DC. And then went and joined kind of the movement out at Standing Rock, because she said the kind of mantra "water is life" really appealed to her, because in her lifetime, from when she was a child to when she's about 40, she's in her 40s now, she witnessed her mother, that the Raccoon River, the river she grew up finding solace in, she witnessed that river become too polluted to swim in. Like if you go through Iowa now, like no one thinks about swimming in the Raccoon River, and it's because of corporations that have polluted the waters in Iowa. Iowa is one of the heartland states, and so we can all imagine how sick the heart of America is. And if you go there, most of the rivers there are polluted from industrial agriculture and factories there. So water is life really appealed to Jessica, and she went to Standing Rock and eventually came back to Iowa because she was told, like, the pipeline's going through Iowa. If you can help stop it there, you should. And so she got a lot of people together, kind of led a movement down there. And eventually, even though everyone had fought the permits, everyone had fought for an environmental impact statement, the government decided that the company didn't need to do one, even though it was building a massive pipeline through all the waterways that over 60 million people relied on for their water. So all the legal ways to stop the pipeline had ended, and so Jessica and a friend of hers went down the route and cut holes in the empty pipe with an oxyacetylene torch. And eventually were being surveilled by private security, were being surveilled by the FBI, and they came forward and claimed responsibility. I think part of it was because of kind of the stress of surveillance, where they kind of wanted to just make sure that they didn't get disappeared without anyone knowing their story. And the FBI raided their house with a SWAT team, like automatic weapons, at the Catholic Worker House, which is a soup kitchen in Des Moines. And then they were each charged with about 10, I think it was 10 felonies, and they're facing up about 150 years in prison because 9 out of the 10 of the felonies had mandatory minimums. And so after that, they were on house arrest for about 3 years. And eventually Jessica took a deal that was pleading guilty to the only thing that didn't have a mandatory minimum, which was conspiracy, which her sentencing guidelines were about 3 years, but the judge added a terrorism enhancement, which bumped it up to, the guidelines would have been for about 20 to 25 years, but the judge only gave her 8, even though that was double the original sentencing guideline, and said that she had to pay $3 million to the pipeline company. And yeah, and then she's going to be on probation for another 4 years. And so I think something I'd like to connect Jess's case with is just kind of what everyone's been saying, is like they come for you in the morning, you know, or they come for them in the morning, they come for you at noon. And what one of the main issues with Jessica's case is it's an example of the US government using this vocabulary of terrorism against people to prevent people and to justify mass surveillance and to justify these increased charges and justify state repression. There was the surveillance during Standing Rock with private security, and there was also a massive network of state surveillance combined with the private security surveillance. And so even though the pipeline was illegal, was deemed by federal courts illegal and illegally built because it didn't have the proper permits, it was still illegal to stop the illegally permitted pipeline, you know? And that's kind of the question that a lot of people face, is when the only legal way to stop injustice is to do nothing, what responsibility do we have to fight for justice? And so I just want to also connect this language of terrorism. Like, Jessica was not the first environmentalist or climate activist or water protector to be hit with this terrorism enhancement. The use of the terrorism enhancement was popularized against environmental movement in the early 2000s during the Green Scare. And I don't know if people here know about the kind of like the anti-globalization movement in the late 90s. It kind of culminated in the Battle of Seattle, where in 1998, over 10,000 people shut down the streets of Seattle. So the WTO, the World Trade Organization, couldn't meet. And so there was this like kind of growing anti-globalization movement that was really shutting down these global forums where the United States and other big empires were kind of trying to expand their power over countries all over the world to increase third world debt, to spread free trade policies, to basically just like increase capitalism and injustice in the world. And there was a really successful movement to stop it. And, you know, I have a bunch of friends who were part of the movement at that time, and they said that, you know, they felt the momentum, and then 9/11 happened, and that's all I'm going to say. 9/11 happened, and it was used to justify the passage of the Patriot Act and all of this state repression that basically was like, the threat of terrorism is everywhere. We can now do anything, and we can now surveil anyone. And that's when they started using terrorism enhancements against environmental movements. And the reason that this is really dangerous to any movement is because, you know, once they start using those enhancements, it sets precedents. And so what we're seeing now in Atlanta with the battle against Cop City is that the terrorism enhancement that was used against Jessica is now being applied to people trying to prevent a massive police training facility being built in Atlanta. And so people who are just in the woods are being charged with domestic terrorism for wanting the city to actually keep the agreements that they had about protecting the forest and not build a massive police training facility. And so that's just kind of just like the government is using this language more and more and more. And with the campaign to free Jessica Reznicek, we're fighting to get Jess out of prison, to get the terrorism enhancement repealed, but also to make sure that it's not okay, that people don't think it's okay to call, like Black Lives Matter, to call Jessica, to call anyone a terrorist for fighting for justice. And something that King Downey said is that's at least true about Jessica's case is when you looked at Standing Rock, I was at the Standing Rock movement and then also at movement in Minnesota that was fighting a different pipeline. What the government learned from Standing Rock is to not let movements get momentum. You know, a couple years later at Line 3, like Standing Rock, it took them about 4 months to create the network of surveillance and start charging people with terrorism and start charging people with felonies. In Minnesota, what we saw is the government, years before any momentum had actually taken place, activated all the fusion centers, had a multi-agency task force surveilling everyone when it was still very small, and then started charging people with felonies really early on. And so if we look at tactics and kind of back to what King Downey was saying about how Cointelpro was used against hip hop, something that you can expect in terms of government tactics is once they start kind of like finding a tactic that they like, they're not going to wait to let organizations get politicized or let organizations get momentum. They'll try and use that tactic as early as possible. And with the train derailment in Palestine, Ohio, that happened recently, where chemical trains exploded in this small town, and then the governor decided to light them on fire. Aaron Brockovich, who's like a famous environmental lawyer, went there, and the FBI immediately started circulating a thing to the fusion centers saying Aaron Brockovich represented special interest terrorism, which is like the same kind of vocabulary that they used against Black Lives Matter with Black identity extremism. You know, it's like basically what happens is when local police departments can say that there's special interest terrorism or domestic terrorism, it immediately will activate all this funding and all this agency support to make this kind of like repression happen. And all that's to say, these are things that are happening at a time when we need to be unified. And these are things that are happening to the earth at a time where we really need to be protecting the earth. You know, like the panel on climate change, the scientists worldwide who study climate change have issued their red alert for humanity. And so while that's happening, people in power are actually trying to make it even harder to protect the earth. And so I think this is to say that the most dangerous thing we can do is not be unified. And the most dangerous thing we can do is be scared. And the most dangerous thing we can do is actually not act, because this is the time that we need to act the most. And so with that, if you want to support Jessica Reznicek, you can go to supportjessicareznicek.com. And I really appreciate being on here with such amazing other speakers, and hope to work together in the future to support each other and free all political prisoners.
Yeah. Free them all. Thank you, Monty. That was great. Very important. You know, they're the terrorists, but you know, they'll call everybody else a terrorist. Not surprising. I had somewhere, if I can find it. Well, anyway, I'll look for it later. My friend Antonella from Jericho, Boston, was supposed to talk more about Cobb City. Apparently, she has not been able to get on the Zoom. So we'll bypass that for the moment. King is trying to get in touch with some folk. He's actually going to have them on his radio program Monday morning at 6:30. People who were arrested at Cobb City, so go to BAI.org and check out a Good Morning Nueva York. Very good program. And if you don't get up at that time in the morning, that's okay. You know, you can listen to it. It's archived on bai.org. So I wanted to introduce another wonderful warrior sister and comrade from the Black is Back Coalition, Lisa Davis, among other things. I know you're not just the Black is Back Coalition, to talk about the current situation with the Uhuru 3, who are facing or have already been indicted on, you know, some really spurious and ridiculous charges. And that's another very familiar Cointelpro type tactic to get people have to be involved in going to court, having big show trials, spending money on defense, all this kind of stuff. And it's very important because it's happening now. So Lisa, please, you can stay where you are if you want, and I'll bring you the mic. Or you have it on the camera. Come on up. If you want a chair, I can bring you a chair.
I think I'm okay. Sit down. First of all, I just want to thank everybody who's here. Many of you I've seen before. It's so great to be in the company of revolutionaries and freedom fighters. That's the only way to live. If you can't live liberated, then the next best thing is to live fighting for liberation. And that's either liberation or fighting for it. And so much of what everybody has already spoken to in this room really leads up to what has happened and what's currently going on with the Uhuru movement, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru 3. And let me begin by saying this first and foremost. I want to be clear about this. I am the vice chair of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. That name is very important. Chairman Omali Yeshitela is one of the co-founders, but that the Black is Back Coalition and myself, as the vice chair, as an individual, stand in complete 100% solidarity with Omali Yeshitela, Penny Hess, Jesse Neville, the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, and we are very proud of the work of the Black is Back Coalition, as everybody in this room should be. Now, we know this much, that there's a world of difference between what is defined as legal and what is defined as just, and what justice is. Legal is whatever the hell these colonizers say it is. That's what legal is. But it oftentimes has nothing to do with justice. Surely most of the time it has nothing to do with social justice at all. And I also just want to say a couple of things before I forget to say them. I want to say them right up front. May 27th, next Saturday, the Hands Off Uhuru campaign, and I really encourage everybody to please be connected to the Hands Off Uhuru campaign, and that's Uhuru, UHURU. You can go to handsoffuhuru.org and sign up for emails and everything about what is going on. But they are calling for a massive day of action nationally and internationally, and in Newark, New Jersey. And everybody in this room is invited here, that you can go across the river. But in front of the federal building on Broad Street at 12 o'clock, there will be an action condemning these spurious, horrible, ridiculous indictments and arrests against the Uhuru movement, and letting the FBI and the feds know we're not afraid. We're coming to their door. We do not care. Basically, also, I just want to say, because I heard one of the sisters talking about Cori Bush, and I believe, if I heard correctly, that she's working on something because she's so bothered by the fact Cointelpro and all of that. Well, one of the things that she must be questioned on is, why did she sign off on the Countering Malign Russian Activities in Africa Act, which was the raids on the Uhuru movement happened last year, July 29th, 2022. They signed off on this act about a month before then. It was brought to the Congress to the House by Gregory Meeks, and all of the Congressional Black Caucus signed on to it, and so did the squad. And basically, it called for the United States to monitor the actions of every country in Africa as it pertains to Russia and the US interests, but not just every country in Africa, but to monitor the activities of every Black person throughout the world. The Congressional Black Caucus, every one of them signed on to it, including Cori Bush. The squad, it was bipartisan, and I know it passed the House fast like anything. HR 40 ain't passing nothing, but that's a different story. But and I'm not exactly sure what the Senate did with it, but they need to be called to the carpet on that. One of the things, some very important things that I just want to bring up about these scurrilous indictments, and I'm going to basically talk about this through the work that we have been doing, because we are so proud of the work we have been doing. And one of the things, and I don't think that this is a coincidence, but I think it was in 2014 that the Black is Back Coalition developed our electoral campaign school. Prior to that, we came up with a 19-point platform to introduce revolutionary, radical principles into these elections based on the history of the Black liberation struggle. And we preach all the time to Black people, but not just Black people, anyone. You hold these politicians accountable. And if they're not going to speak to your issues, whether they're Democrat, Republican, or whatever they call themselves, don't vote for them. Throw them out of office. You owe nothing to the Democratic Party at all. There has been what Black people owe, any advance that we have ever made in this country, what we owe that to is the Black liberation struggle. Nothing has ever come to us by voting for it, so we should not ever vote with fear. I don't care who's Republican or Democrat. If they don't represent your issues, do not vote for them. And we developed electoral campaign schools soon after that to work with people, to train, to have these discussions. How do you find revolutionary candidates? How do you support them? And that year that we had our first electoral campaign school, the African People's Socialist Party had decided to run 2 candidates. This is very important because so much of that scurrilous indictment is about this, whether they come out and say it or not, because the people that one of them, who was one of the indicted of the Uhuru 3, Jesse Neville, ran, I think it ran for mayor of St. Petersburg, Florida, and someone who is not indicted, or at least not indicted yet, because they hang this stuff over your head, and she was referenced as one of the unindicted co-conspirators, ran for city council or something like that, but they ran together, and they ran on a platform of reparations for the Black community and make St. Petersburg Black again, or something like that. The first time ever, long before Marion Williams, long before she said anything about reparations, they ran on it first. It made international news. And Jesse Neville, the first time that reparations had been introduced into an electoral campaign. It was Omali Yeshitela whose idea it was to have an electoral campaign school. He didn't have to twist any hands or anything like that because we were on board with it. But his ability to be able to do that and then to put it into action, not just come up with an idea, but to put it into concrete action is tremendous, and is one of the reasons why I believe that they're after him. Now, do you think it's a coincidence that Jesse Neville, a white person who was the first one of the first candidates to run on a platform of reparations, has been very, very vocal about it, calling for it, saying that we must overturn this corrupt culture of violence that white people, that their whole existence has been based upon? You think that's any coincidence that he's currently indicted? Penny Hess is another one. Again, she's white, and she is, they all acknowledge to working under the leadership of Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party. And she talks all the time about overturning this violent culture that white life is based upon, every aspect of it. She talks vocally. You think that's any coincidence that she's indicted? But guess who they didn't go after? George Zimmerman. Carolyn Bryant was allowed to croak without any fear whatsoever of this government coming after her. This government protected her. In fact, ironically, it was the Department of Justice under Trump who reopened the Emmett Till murder case, and it was the Biden administration that closed it in 2021. Yeah, but you know, the Department of Justice could find nothing wrong with them at all, nothing at all. And while it is going after the African People's Socialist Party and talk about, oh my gosh, he knows a Russian. Oh, he knows a Russian. That's evidence right there that, you know, he's colluding with Russia. When we hear about all of these mass shootings, and we heard about the one in Buffalo, I think that happened maybe about 2 weeks before the raid on the African People's Socialist. I know it happened before, and not too much longer before that it happened. And then we saw about, what, a week later something, Uvalde, Texas, white persons able to go in and do a school and kill all these young kids. You know, they were able to kill 10 people, Buffalo, and then all these other mass shootings, and they call them a lone gunman. What? No, they don't call them terrorists, but they say, oh, they're a lone gunman, which is a lie. There's all of this information about them putting online what they wanted. In fact, the Buffalo shooter was able to publish online for months what he wanted to do. But somehow, the FBI and the Department of Justice, and I'm going to call it on because it's the Democrats in office and they're the ones doing this, they could not find anything. They couldn't stop that. They could find nothing with that because your eyes was just looking at the African People's Socialist Party. Some of the things that they're being accused of, and I think that this is really significant, but not surprising or anything. I just lost my place a moment, is colluding with Russia, basically being an agent of the Russians, and sowing discord and promoting Russian agenda. That language is very important. Omali Yeshitela has been involved in the Black liberation movement all of his life, I'd venture to say. I think the African People's Socialist Party is maybe about 50 years old, have always charged genocide. The United States has always said it. I've said it. Always, always. There is such a large body of work online, like the Burning Spear newspaper. If you go to handsoffuhuru.org, literally they have an archive linking to every article of the Burning Spear newspaper, which goes back, like to the 1980s. So this is all information that you can see for yourself in terms of his commitment to the struggle and what he talks about, like the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. But let's be clear about this. According to those indictments, this is sowing discord. And they are promoting Russian propaganda. Let's be clear. So talking about social justice, peace, and reparations is Russian propaganda. It is not what this government is about. There was the murder of George Floyd. You can go back and listen to everything that Omali Yeshitela has been talking about. He ain't been saying nothing in secret. He's been talking about these things, but they're saying that these protests against what was going on with George Floyd, Mike Brown, there are so many, Sandra Bland, there are so many names, I cannot even keep them in my head. And I'm just talking about the abuse with the ones who have been killed many times, the ones who survived the abuse. We don't even hear about their names, but they're probably, for everyone that has been killed, there's probably about a good 100 who have survived abuse. And yet, according to these indictments, and I'm going to just say this, what these indictments to me are, well, my name is going to be, you are a nigger indictment, because that's what it's saying. If it's saying that that's Russian propaganda to talk about, to be against police brutality, and that's sowing discord in the United States, what is that telling you? But it's telling us what we have always known, because the United States ain't never been anything but this. And you have no place in this country if you are Black, unless you want to take your place as being what they have always seen you as, what they always called you, the only place they got you, and that is to be a nigger under their control. They are charging him with interfering with elections. So the Black is Back campaign school, the 19-point platform, and this don't offend me at all, because I'll tell anybody right now, my whole purpose has been to interfere with these corrupt, horrible elections and to tell Black people to rise up. You do not need, I ain't against voting, but vote with power. Vote with the understanding that it is a Black liberation struggle, not no Democrat or Republican, that has delivered any semblance at all of freedom. Even we go back as far as the Civil War and before, it is because African people, enslaved Africans, rose up and fought back. Our stories and narratives have always been stolen. They have always been stolen. But it is not the truth at all. We ask everyone to stand with us. These indictments are just, I mean, if I had any pride in the United States, I would say I was so embarrassed that they would write something as much filled with such trash and garbage as this, but they don't care about that, because your whole point is not even so much about winning, it is about destroying. It is about wreaking havoc. It is about destruction. It don't cost them nothing. That Joe Biden ain't worried at all, ain't paying a dime for any of this. Who's it costing? Who's the ones who has to do all this work? Proud to do the work, proud to do it, but it is the people who they come after. It is the people. The African People's Socialist Party, I can tell you right now, ain't got no trillions of dollars and all this stolen gold and everything that people like the Bidens sit on, and the United States government. They can have all these kind of things against people. It costs them nothing. It is about just being as destructive as you possibly can be. And there'll be many times, because the system is so corrupt, many will end in jail, some might not, but that's what their purpose is. So when that's your purpose, you don't got to tell, because nothing that they say in those indictments are true, but it ain't about truth, because you ain't got to tell the truth. And certainly when the truth is not on your side, you're never going to tell it. So these are just some of the things I can think of right now that I just wanted to bring up. I so appreciate the chance to do this. I also just want to give a shout out to some strong comrades, Ann Lamb, Ralph Pointer, Betty Davis. They always do this wonderful radio show. They talk about these issues, and so many other people. I don't even like to really get into naming people because I'm always going to mess up on that. But again, you know the time that is before us, but it was never not here. It really never was. And I just want to say this about Cointelpro. I want people listening to remember Cointelpro in name only came into existence when I forget the exact year around the time. But prior to that, This is what it always was, whether they called it Cointelpro or whatever name, or the slave catchers, the night riders. The system of policing was founded only for one reason: to put down insurrections of the oppressed people. And with enslaved Africans, I think, being the first, that's what it came into existence for. It has never been anything different. And we know, the night ride, I think they called themselves as something with the indigenous people. But the truth is on our side. And we have to stand in that no matter what. One of the things I will say, because I know Molly Yeshitela has been talking about this, we are mounting a counteroffensive. We are not afraid. Ain't nobody going underground or into hiding. We're going to fight back. And also, just one other thing I want to say, because they don't like this at all. The truth just don't make them look good. But I've wondered, I said to myself, if the African nations were capitulating to the United States right now and was basically taking the line that the United States has been trying to force them to take, and they're not doing it as it comes to this scurrilous war. And by the way, 2 days before Russia went into Ukraine, the United States bombed Somalia. They've been hitting Somalia like anything. They have their shadow wars with Africa. They got wars all over you. Some of them are called wars, some of them are not, very difficult to keep up with. But I know that Amali Yeshitela, and he certainly made me aware of this, for which I'm so grateful. I know when this thing did happen against Ukraine, he was putting out the truth. And he was saying that Russia ain't never invaded Africa. Russia never enslaved us. And I'm like, wow. And that's the truth. And so I just wonder that if the African countries, and I'm proud of the African countries taking the stance that they're taking, but if that they were capitulating to the United States, would the United States have found the need to go after Amali Yeshitela? I think that has something to do with it too, because it's very, very difficult when you got Black people over here who ain't gonna listen to this damn stuff and who are challenging that narrative, and African people kind of also challenging the narrative. The U.S. ain't in a good spot. Thank you so much.
That was very, love that fiery, inspiring speech. Very good. Well, apparently Sister Antonella was not able to get on. We could talk about Cop City. It has been mentioned. As we know, that is an extension of everything that we've already spoken about. I want to give King time to come up and talk about some things that we can do to help minimize or counteract a lot of these COINTELPRO type activities. But right before that, that's very short, we have a little statement from Leslie James Pickering, who I wanted to be one of the people presenting here today, but he couldn't do it. He had another gig, he said. But on May 17th, he issued this little announcement, and it says, alert. About an hour ago, I had a visit from the FBI. The agent presented her badge, stuck her foot in the threshold of the door, and attempted to ask me about the fire last June at Compass Care here in Buffalo. I replied that I was not going to talk to her, pointed to her intrusive foot, and said she was not welcome to come inside. The FBI has an inexcusable and horrific track record of working to destroy social justice movements, which spans its entire history. I have personally been targeted by the FBI for over 25 years, and the thought of cooperating with them in any way turns my stomach, to say the least. Please beware that this investigation is underway, and do all you can to spread the word about this danger to activists, our movements, and our collective future. Together, we keep us safe. Leslie James Pickering. All right, King. King is going to come back up and give us some legal advice.
I'm not allowed to give legal advice, but hypothetical advice. No, but I want to give props to Leslie, because Leslie also is the co-proprietor of Burning Books. And I love my station, WBAI, but if I hear one more producer or one more host say, and you can get the book of the author we just had by going to Amazon, Can you imagine a progressive station sending people to Amazon when we got people's bookstores that are dropping left and right? So go to Burning Books, order your books from there. That's what I'm going to do. And let's support Leslie and let's support the people who are part of the movement and stop making Bezos more of a billionaire. So I like that story because that's a good segue. It reminded me of during the Republican National Convention, we had a whole legal office set up. We had legal observers, and we got sent live video from the porch of some activists where the FBI showed up outside to ask them questions. Now, they didn't let them in, but what the video showed was while they were having their back and forth on the porch, the local police went around behind them and went into the house and came back out while they were talking to the FBI. So the number one theme is to know your rights, but also to be vigilant. How can we, having the authorities there, come out our door and not be watching our backs so that other police can go in, which was the point, and search the house for who knows what, and who knows what they took out. So I just added some steps here, and we have enough people here to have a quick conversation about it, about what do we do about this? Go back to what Kwame Ture said. You know, he said we are past the time for description, the time is prescription. If we don't come away from here with some ideas on how to protect ourselves about that, then I have to say, to me, we've wasted our time. So I have a few things. So the first ones are personal, and then the next ones are organizational, and anybody can feel free to jump in with anything. And the first one is, they are not omnipotent. If I told you how many times we're in meetings and people say, oh, well, they know that, and oh, they know this, and they can get this. There's a defeatist mentality that we build up when we always acknowledge that they have access to everything because they're gathering so much information. Even Ceausescu, who was a dictator in Czechoslovakia, had gathered so much information about everybody that it was useless because they had miles and miles of warehouses for information, and it took them forever to get it. And even with all their search engines, and even with Langley, Virginia holding everything that's on the internet everywhere, they're still going to get clogged up, and we can't just be defeatists and think they've got it all in their hands. The other thing is, we have to get rid of this paranoia. Okay, I go to meetings and I see people like looking each other down like, are you the cops? Are you the cops? I mean, people coming in and just saying, hey, brother, sister, how are you? They're looking at them like, you know, don't be thinking I'm going to get fooled by being friendly with you. We got to keep our humanity together, and we want to substitute paranoia for vigilance. Just pay attention, be open to people, but just observe the things that they say and do. The last part of it is study the history. One of the reasons why I'm a student of this, and I think I do well at it, is I've studied so many of these tactics. There isn't anything new they can come up with. Everything they've done comes up over and over again in every case. And if you know enough of this, as soon as something happens, you automatically extrapolate what they're getting ready to do and what they just did because it's happened so many times before. And there's going to be nothing new in this case here. And in the environmental cases or anything, there's nothing new. So we just need to study it and study it until it becomes intuitive. And then the last one is, we got to take care of our phones, okay? I was listening to, of all places, NPR, and there was a reporter there who says, oh, I'm at the air show and we're looking at all the latest Air Force inventions in planes. And I'm here with Captain so-and-so, and he's motioning for me to get into a tent. He's unzipping the tent, and I'm going inside now. Now we're closing the tent, and the captain says, turn on your cell phone. And the reporter says, it's on, but nothing's there. He said, because this is a new high-tech tent that we take into the battlefield so that when we're using our electronics to plot the battle, that nothing scanning outside can pick up the signal. And so you're not going to get anything on your phone. So then the captain says to the reporter, oh, and you know what? You know how when you're at a meeting and you got your phone there on the table, it can pick up all the conversations that are going on. Now, this is an Air Force captain telling him that. And so if it's being made that public, why do we go to our critical meetings and sit there with our phones all around the table, sending everything right to Langley, Virginia about everything we're planning and plotting. So put your phone away, put it in a soundproof place. You notice anything else about my phone? What do you see there at the top? Little green stickers that block off the cameras. Why do you want to send Langley, Virginia, every place you've been and everybody you're talking to throughout your whole day? And we had to fight to get body cams on them, and we have body cams we carrying around 24/7. So I brought some little stickers for you all so that you can take action now. You can stick them on your phones. You notice on the other side, the camera on the back is blocked as well. So we have to start doing some small things to protect ourselves. Now, last thing about the organizations. I already said to learn these methods so that we're prepared for them. I named some of the tactics they use, but some of what are some of the things that we can do to protect ourselves? One of the simplest things is to look at your organizational structure. There are so many groups that want to be so democratic, and I'm all for democracy. They open up their meetings to everybody, even when they talk about strategy and everything they're going to do. Yes, come on in. Hi, you're new here. Could you tell us who you are? Would you have any ideas on what we could do for our next protest? No, you create a central committee. You do that work among people you trust, and then you have a public meeting and invite people in, and they don't just get to sign up for memberships. When Jaleel was behind bars, he sent out, and maybe Brother Shep, veteran Black Panther Party member, I was a community worker for the party. Maybe you remember what it was called, but he said one of the errors among many that the party made, of course, did a lot of things right, was the door was open to anybody who walked in and said they wanted to be a member of the party. You're immediately a member and you started getting your political education. And Jaleel said that there should be a period of time where people are probationary, and then after they show their practice and show their consistency and show their political consciousness, then they're allowed to join. And so when Sister Shiva started the Black Panther Committee for Social Progress, we all had to work for a year before we could allow to say that we were members. We couldn't even identify, we just had to do the work. So organizations should set up those kinds of structures. And so you set that period, take time as people come to do the work to learn a little bit about them. Oh, so where are you from? Where are you about? What do you do? Learn a little bit of things that are going on with folks before you pull them right in and give them responsibilities like having them in charge of the money. So many times, Cointelpro took groups out by having people come in and mess with the money. And between the ninjas, who are the agents, and the knuckleheads, who are the opportunists, your organization doesn't really have much of a chance to succeed. If you saw the movie about Fred Hampton and the informant, you saw that they talked about George Sams, who was the informant around the New Haven trials. And George Sams was going from city to city, wrecking shit, and then leaving and showing up at another chapter. And I haven't had a chance to talk to anybody who knew him or knew his history, but he was going from place to place, and we have to share that information. And when people disappear, we got to find out from other people whether they've appeared somewhere else. So this doesn't go on. Record keeping is important to document your history, document what happened. And not only because of Cointelpro, but because of Knowintelpro. People get into arguments because they don't even remember the history of the meetings and who was going to do what task. Those are complete ways to create division and undo organizations moving forward successfully. So always make sure that keep track of thefts, keep track of losses, things start to disappear, develop contingency plans. The anti-terrorism workshops that Brother Shep and I do, we do a scenario where people at a community meeting and the police run it. How many organizations have even talked about what to do if they suddenly show up at the door or if they just bust in? Who's going to do what? I'm thinking about here, the People's Forum. The police showed up, and I would like to think if they didn't before as a result of that, they have a plan for who's going to secure the door, who's going to get rid of sensitive documents, and all of those kinds of things as well. First aid, that's something that we need to know, not just because of Cointelpro, and let's see, decentralization, ending the cult of personality. That has taken down more organizations than anything, because a few knuckleheads with a personality cult can take an organization down. And one of the ways that Cointelpro operated was by taking people who had put themselves up or had been put in a cult position, by undermining them, and by allowing people who had that kind of ego to sort of be like leaders for life and not be challenged. And then when something happens, there's no backup when those people get taken out. So I think that's enough for here. But if anybody had any question or comment they wanted to make about anything, or anything that they would add themselves to that.
Have city council adopt these resolutions saying that they want to sanctuary city, people in the population of the Democrat. That's something but that and also the one Democrats was out of the party for America, not even the he was also talking about in the way that he must be social or personality battle that
I'm glad you brought that up, and I'll get to you. And the other thing is, and it was on the list and I just skipped over it, is to take control of your social media and be aware of what you've put out about yourself and your family. They can sit at home now and learn so much about us, and not only just us, but our friends who even are apolitical don't understand this and are putting our information on blast. Another one, and I'm glad you brought that up, that I forget to mention, is you come up with a protocol for how to deal with the irregularities that come from ninjas or knuckleheads. Most groups have never sat down as a group and said, what do we do if we suspect somebody? And is there a process? Is there a person that you take it to? Because what happens is that people bring this out in meetings and there's all kinds of drama. We were doing a workshop, an open workshop on what your rights are during the Republican convention. And this brother came in, you know, he was dressed in what a lot of times people call like white clothing, like a little crew neck sweater and some slacks and some shoes. Everybody else was dressed kind of raw. And after he left the meeting, this brother said, now, you know, we have to be careful here because this guy that was just here, you could look at him, you could tell he was an agent. So now in the middle of 200 people, this bomb gets dropped. And this guy says, now I'm moderating the meeting and I'm saying, now how am I going to handle this? It turns out the guy, he worked for a city councilman. He was there to make sure that the protesters got their rights protected. And he was dressed the way they dressed. And so I said, brother, anytime you put something out like that in the public, what was it that we were taught? No investigation, no investigation, no investigation. And I asked him, so what investigation did you do, brother, to come up with this claim? And he couldn't say anything. I said, if you say something like that, you now are immediately the #1 person under suspicion right now for making a statement like that without coming to us privately. He left the meeting. So I don't know. So we want to make sure that we have a protocol, come to the people who are concerned, and don't put people on blast, because if you're wrong, now you're going to have a real split on your hands. So you take some time, investigate the person who brings it to you. How much more do we need to learn about snitching and bad jacketing and all that kind of stuff? So I'm glad you brought that because it had me think of that last part of it. And you had your hand up too. That's true. And do we ever wonder why now you can't even change the batteries? When we used to have meetings, everybody had to take their batteries out and put them all in a box together with the phones. They couldn't even take them with them. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I've seen those little things and we should just have those because everywhere we go, I mean, imagine somebody can be sitting somewhere and seeing all of us. Now I don't want to add any paranoia to it, but it's something to think about. I think about it all the time. If something wrong with me, my phone is here and I'm saying, oh, look, everybody's here. Somebody can look at some monitor and see that we're all somewhere in the same place. Leave it home one time if you really want to fuck with them. So anyway, anybody else? Question or comment or an experience they've had with any of this? You know where they did that? Anybody remember the Gina 6? The noose hung down in Louisiana. Well, 15,000 of us showed up in this little town. None of the cell phones worked. They shut them all down. And we had to use runners. We had to do all this old fashioned stuff like back in the day. You actually had to go places if you wanted to deliver messages to each other. That's right. That's right. All right. Any last one? All right. So I'm open to any ideas you have about these kind of experiences you had, because we can expect now that they've designated every group we're part of with the T word, we can look for this to start happening. Thank you.
Turns out we do have Antonella. I'm happy to report. So Antonella is going to come on in a minute here once the screen comes down and talk to us a little bit about one of the latest iterations that we're dealing with, which is Cop City. Now, I just read an article, and it might have even just been yesterday. They had this whole city council meeting in Atlanta, and they were having a public, comments thing. And people were saying it was amazing. They went to get online to make a public comment. The thing went all the way up, down the stairs, around the block. Hundreds and hundreds of people came to testify to the Atlanta City Council that they did not want Cop City, and they do not want their tax dollars to have to pay for that. So that just happened like a couple of days ago. So we'll see if the city council, which is supposed to represent the people of Atlanta, actually listens to the people of Atlanta this time, because they didn't last time. So without further ado, assuming we have Antonella.
I am
Antonella
here.
is from Jericho, Boston. She was on the ground in Cop City, so she can speak to it directly.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, my alarm
to
did
wait a
not go
minute.
off. Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry my alarm
Well,
didn't go
hopefully we'll
off.
have Antonella. We're having a little technical glitch.
It seems like they don't hear me.
No,
Betty, I can't hear you.
we can actually hear you.
Oh,
We just can't
perfect.
see you. Why doesn't you just talk then?
That's okay. I just woke up. I'm super frazzled.
That's
I
okay.
think
We
it's
know you're in another place in the world. Go ahead, just talk. And then if we can get you on the
okay.
video, that'll happen.
Incredible. Yeah, so again, I want to say I apologize. My 2:30 in the morning alarm did not go off. I'm so happy that my body woke me up in time to be with you. Earlier today, I was at the Irregular Rhythm Asylum, which is an info shop, a little anarchist library here in Tokyo. And I was meeting a lot of comrades from a lot of the world, that are involved in different struggles and have also felt the pressures of Cointelpro. Specifically, the event was around a showing of the Beehive Collective, of this enormous mural that took 9 years to make, that shows like the struggle of the people for liberation and the oppressive forces that they're fighting, and just the power and diversity in our on-ground movements. And one of the illustrations, it's too bad you can't see, but I will explain, is of these corn, these ears of corn, and they have machetes, and they have bandanas, and they have and they're together, you know, as a fighting force against this plane that is being built. And there's a printing press making photocopies of the plane, which then turns into a runway with like little military guards on it. And this is symbolic of the San Salvador farmers of Atenco, which was a farmers movement. And they had their land there, and the land was under threat of being taken to turn into an airport. And so the farmers, they were offered money, but they didn't know how to live under a system of capitalism, under money, and they also did not want to. And they decided to fight for their land. And they did, and they won. And then years later, the airport tried to be built again, and they also did not let it happen. And this was so powerful, and it showed me a lot of parallels in the Stop Cop City movement that I think we can learn a lot from. And essentially the airport was then built on a military base. So they removed a military base and built an airport, which sounds like a win if there's less military bases. So with that starting, I'll just talk about Cop City, but that was like my real inspiration of today. So Cop City, as a lot of you know, is a $90 million project that tries to create like a fake city for police to do military training on. This is going to have a fake low-income housing on it, you know, so they can practice kettling people. This is going to have a fake nightclub on it. Will have a fake gas station on it. These are all places where I have clear memories of either people being killed by the forces of the police or by like little white supremacist kids that, you know, take all that governmental violence and internalize that and then, you know, lash out and sort of mass killings of sort. So it would also have a Black Hawk helicopter pad, and I think you can just imagine the horrors of it. They would also want to use it to train the IOF, the occupation officers that are committing genocide and land grabs in Palestine. And we know that this deadly exchange has a long history of not just now the deadly exchange happens, they're literally university police or members of occupation, as Betty Davis calls them, which I really, really appreciate because they are occupying forces here on the land. That train with the Israeli occupation forces, and actually the technique that was used to murder George Floyd was taught by the occupation forces. So the parallels are very, very, very strong internationally, and I think, you know, the people's movements are united because of that. So I was on the ground in Atlanta, and yeah, this recent wave of oppression has found us with 2 people in our like direct intimate community having these bogus domestic terrorist charges, and then another person in our vicinity, and there's been a lot of support. And one thing that I find interesting is like with these Cointelpro tactics, often they pin it on people in groups, whether it's Green Scare, Black Liberation movements, you name it, AIM, they pin it on someone in a group, and the aim not is to divert resources, and also to distract, to put the focus on something else so that the movement is no longer the central focus. And this is what I learned in my studies. This is what I learned in my conversations with elders. But I'm very, very grateful to feel that, like, in these rounds of oppression that have been happening in the Stop Cop City movement, everything feels very channeled and focused. And I do feel like the fight of our political detainees to free them, to drop the charges, and all of the support it's rallying feels completely in line with the aim to stop Cop City. It doesn't in any way feel like a diversion of resources or attention. So that is very empowering, just the amount of solidarity that I experienced on ground, whether it's 3 hot meals in the forest a day, transportation to events and things in the city and in different areas, and just people's general warmth and revolutionary optimism. It's a really beautiful thing to see. Another thing I've been reflecting on is how Cointelpro, has operated in this, is the fact that the first judge that presided over the initial hearings of our round of detainees was Judge Anna Davis. I was like, okay, Anna Davis, last name Davis, Angela Davis, maybe, hopefully there's something, maybe some people get bail. No, turns out her husband is like the owner of a major NGO that like funds Cop City. And I think this was released and people weren't surprised, but also this is also a way that, I think Cointelpro infiltrates. Even if this wasn't planned ahead, of course, these people are trying to control all the avenues of, of freedom and of lack of freedom. So there's that. I want to read a statement from Tortuguita. I was very, very, very grateful to meet Tortuguita's mother, Belkis, and she said, "Tortuguita vive, Cop City is dead." For those of you that aren't familiar yet, Tortuguita was the first martyr of the Stop Cop City movement. They were sitting in a meditative position with their hands in the air, and was shot like dozens of times. And the police tried to plant a gun and say, oh, like they shot first. But of course, because we're familiar with Cointelpro, we're familiar with their tricks. And people that knew Tortuguita personally, they knew that was not true. And it was then shown from independent autopsy that there was in fact no gunpowder on the hands, and that it was not true. So yeah, no matter which way you resist, there will be, terrible violence faced. But I think this also brings, some teachings on resistance, and that diversity is where like true power is held, and also creativity, because we have creativity. They don't. If you see the colonizers' way of oppression, they replicate the same motions over and over again. And I always think of, it was the LAPD like chief, and it was during the George Floyd uprisings, and he was quoted saying, "We can manage a 100,000 person protest or rally or manifestation. What we can't deal with is we can manage a 10,000 person, protest. What we can't manage is 1,000 people protests." So I think that speaks a lot to how they think. They want to pin down, oh, this is the place, but they can't spread out. They can't diversify. They can't deal with the diversity of what is our resistance and what it truly is, which I think is very beautiful, and also brings up, ideas of like guerrilla tactics or guerrilla tactics. and, not replicating the oppressor's way. So I will read this from Tortuguita, which I think is very foretelling and has teachings in it. And they said, what I'm saying is, if they do a huge crackdown and completely try to crush the movement, they'll succeed at hurting some people. They'll succeed at destroying some infrastructure, but they're not going to succeed at stopping the movement. That's going to strengthen the movement. It will draw a lot of attention to the movement. If enough people decide to do this with nonviolent action, and I will paraphrase, like, we support, the wide range of struggle, and we need to be, in support. Everyone has a puzzle piece, but it is counterproductive to criticize people resisting something that is oppressive. And so I will say that. You can overwhelm the infrastructure. That's something they fear more than violence in the streets, because violence in the streets, they'll win, they have guns for it, and we don't. Tortuguita. I think what they said is very foreshadowing, and they literally said they might kill some people, and they ended up being the martyr in that. So we always have their memory with us. But it is true. We learned from Palestine that when one martyr falls, 100 rise to take their place. And there is so much beauty and truth in that. So I also just want to quickly say, like, encountering Cointelpro, I heard some comments on this, but yeah, not to just give our information up as much as we can help it. So even just like taking videos and photographs, like asking for consent is very, very basic. And just working in our interpersonal relationships, because that's where the real strength is, that's where the love is, and that's what will push us to do incredible things and create. So yeah. And from a microcosmic to macrocosmic level, whether it's like at our emotional level, just kind of like bulletproofing for Cointelpro per se. So not being paranoid, as King said, but really being thoughtful and careful about our processes of our internalized, internalized colonizers in our minds, and really doing the work interpersonally to strengthen, and it's essential. So I will open to questions. I don't know how I am on timing, but thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here, Antonella, even though you're in Tokyo. No, that was very good. And I was glad you read that little piece from Tortuguita, because, that was really outrageous, the way they just blew him away or them away. 57 shots is what I heard from the second autopsy. And, if you're just like nonviolently sitting in a tree, why should you be killed for that? But, we know the answer to that question. You are a terrorist for sitting nonviolently in that tree, and we have every right to take your life, the fascists will say, and have said, and will continue to say. So thank you so much for getting on. We thought we weren't going to have you at all, so we're very glad that you were able to come on. And I just wanted to say one more time, because King told me before, Monday morning at 6:30 Eastern Time, WBAI.org, King Downing will be talking with some of the folk who were arrested at Cop City. So people could tune in, and if not, you can always listen live on WBAI.org for Good Morning Nueva York, and it will be archived, and you can listen to it in the future. And also just want to say, as New York City Jericho, I'm so thankful for everybody who came and spoke. Oh, Antonella, Shep says to give him a call. Anyway, so I'm thankful for everybody who came to present. This is a very serious time. We've faced these times before. We'll face these times again. And as everybody, I think, has really reiterated, we need to be united in principle, in struggle against this system. And I want to apologize once again to Ngoma for not having the proper technical equipment. But he was fantastic anyway, right? Yeah. So, but you should hear him when he has all of his stuff, man. It's just amazing. And you can get his CDs. I have his book. I would encourage people to get his book. It is fantastic. 50 years of poetry. And I'm going to have him sign it for me before he leaves tonight. So I think that due to the level of interest in this, you know, topic, we're going to have some more in-depth upcoming, you know, discussions around this issue, because it's very important, and we see that the repression is getting worse and worse, and absolutely it is. And, you know, they got empowered after, you know, they did their thing in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and then they felt more empowered. So now it's like even worse than it was back in the day to some extent. And so we really have to be prepared for major fight of our lives. So definitely, we'll definitely continue these conversations. And I thank everybody for coming out today, and everybody who's listening and watching on the stream. And thank you to all our great panelists. Did a tremendous job. Oh, and thank you, Lisa, for thanking me. And thank the People's Forum for, you know, hosting us, and as they have consistently done. And it's a great movement space that's available to folk. So keep that in mind. And while you're here, check out Shep's buttons and literature, and get informed about some of our political prisoners, because there's going to be more political prisoners in the coming times. We know this. All right, get prepared, folk. Free the land. As somebody said earlier today, free the land because we the land.